Hello everyone, welcome to another Grinder Gaming video. Today I'm going to talk about the new Viridian Plasma beam weapons that come out of the new Emerald Chain lockbox, why I think they have an amazing potential, and the problems I'm having setting up a build with them. So first of all, I wasn't playing when the change to beam overload was made, but originally from what I understand it was just a single activation burst of damage you could do with your beams, and then it was changed to a firing mode that you sustain for 10 seconds, and if you read the description on it, it says it increases your damage to 4 times of the default and it decreases your fire rate to half of normal. So when that change was made, one of the biggest damage increases to beam overload builds you could do became increasing your firing cycle haste back up to close to a normal fire rate from the reduced to half that you get in the beam overload. So with that in mind, let's take a look at those weapons. The reason why they look so good on paper to me is that the proc on them is a 2.5% chance to trigger 30% firing cycle haste for 6 seconds for all Viridian Plasma weapons. Now during beam overload, because your weapons fire slower, that proc chance rate is actually increased from 2.5% up to 5%, so you get a fairly decent chance of sustaining that firing mode, and that was my goal. I actually did buy a turret for the back of the ship in case I kind of found that I wasn't triggering it as often as I wanted to. But I find with how fast these weapons fire and all the firing cycle haste on them, and that's built into my build, is triggering often enough to keep that up virtually 100% of the time once you get it going. Now, that's why they look amazing. The problem that I'm running into setting up a build with them is that it doesn't stipulate it on the description for beam overload, but when you are in beam overload, it also increases how much power your weapons draw, and I believe it actually doubles how much it costs to fire your weapons under beam overload. So at that, because they're firing so fast because of the baked-in proc and all of the baked-in firing cycle haste I have in my build, the problem I have is it's draining my weapon power so fast that it's almost like the server can't kind of keep up with what's going on. And I run into instances where I'm getting knocked out of beam overload, or my weapons stop firing completely, acting like, because if your weapon power goes too low when you're in beam overload, it will knock you out of beam overload and it will actually cut your weapon system offline until it can recover. And I've been watching my weapon power while I'm using beam overload, and a lot of times it's at 150 and kind of maybe dip into 120, 112 and whatever, but I've rarely even seen it going below 100, and yet my ship is still sometimes acting like it's got no weapon power, like my weapon system went offline. It'll just, all the weapons will stop firing, I'll get knocked out of beam overload. So what I have kind of come to understand is it seems like the server isn't really great at keeping up with how fast your EPS system is recharging and then funneling power into your weapon system, and it's causing some weird kind of issues for me with it. So what I've started doing, and you might find it funny, I've got this white singularity core on the ship, and I actually did use it in the elite run that I'll play at the end of this video, so you can kind of see how this setup runs. And I was actually getting less instances of being knocked out of beam overload, or the server seemed to think I had no weapon power, even though it on my screen showed that I'm like over 100 or 150. So I actually did run this in that run, and what I've come to understand is I think that the best way to set up one of these builds going forward is to actually get your weapon power cost reduction high enough so that the server can kind of keep up with what's going on with your going in your weapon power system. So I'll show you some of the consoles and some of the traits and stuff that I'm using currently to try and mitigate the power problems, and also I'll talk a little bit about the things that I don't have that I would like to get as time goes forward to make this build even better. So first thing is, this account's about 1.5 years old. My Endeavor rank is only 95, so that is a little bit of disadvantage that my captain has, that some of you may have better results running this stuff depending on how your Endeavor rank is. Let's take a look First of all, at the traits that I'm running. So if you're striving for a meta beam overload build, I'm sure you already know how important firing cycle haste and the weapon power cost reduction for it is, and therefore emergency weapon cycle is one of the best traits that you can get, if not the best trait you can get, potentially not the best one, but it's one of the best ones you can get for a beam overload build. It gives you that minus 50% weapon power cost reduction and a 20% firing cycle haste. You know, you add that to the 30% on your weapons, are already up to 50%. I'm running Promise of Ferocity to give me an extra 20% damage once it stacks up. History will remember for an extra 30% damage, 30% hull regen, and 30% hull cap. Once it's all spooled up, you have to get shot by 30 different enemies to get it all charged up. Super weapon ingenuity, must have for the beam overload duration to get to be able to sustain beam overload 100% of the time with global cooldowns. And preferential targeting, I would say that is the single biggest damage increase to my beam overload build from anything that I've ever introduced to it. If you take preferential targeting and some pretty junky beams, but a fairly decent, you know, trait setup and whatnot, they'll do decent damage because this trait is so powerful. The problem is it comes out of the 10th anniversary bundle, which is 25,000 Zen. So not, you know, a lot of people, most if not most people, don't have access to it. I saved my dilithium for probably over 6 months, and then I got that bundle when it was 35% off. But just be aware that I place a high value on that trait for beam overload builds. And then out of that same bundle, you get this trait, Overpowered and Overgunned, off of the Legendary Defiant. And it adds another minus 15% weapon power cost and 12.5% firing cycle haste. So I've really geared towards that weapon power cost reduction and the firing cycle haste to get the maximum out of my beam overload. And it synergizes because the faster your weapons are firing, the more chance you have to trigger that proc on your weapons. Everything else is fairly standard space reputation stuff. I will point out that because I'm playing on console, it's tough to even get elites going sometimes. And when I do play elites, most of the time it's a pickup group. There is no dedicated tank. I am not doing leaderboard runs, first of all, because there is no parsing software on the PS4 that we can track our damage output with, so nobody does that anyway on the PS4. But also guys who are doing leaderboard runs, you know, they're maybe doing like 10, maybe all the way up to like 50, 100 runs to get that one perfect run where they get a leaderboard, a high rank in the leaderboards. And so a lot of times they'll run consoles and traits that, you know, if you have the perfect storm and the perfect run, you know, you might get that leaderboard record. But you know, in real world, especially on the console where you're going into TFOs with random groups, you don't know what people are going to be running. There's virtually never anybody tanking. If you're putting out the most damage in those elite TFOs, you're the tank by virtue of getting the most aggro off of the mobs, frankly. So having durability, survivability baked into my build is really just a must-have on console. On PC, you guys maybe have a group of 5 players that have, you know, a dedicated tank and DPSers and so on. And you can build your ship like a glass cannon and not have to worry about any kind of survivability. But in my case, on the console, I have to have some survivability baked in. So I do like the active hull hardening. It gives you increased damage, significant damage resistance as your hull decreases. Everything else in my space rep is very standard. And then in my personal space traits, again, pretty standard stuff: adaptive offense, fleet coordinator, innocuous, operative, intelligence agent attaché, context is for kings, a good day to die, inspirational leader, point blank shot, superior beam training. And I might not have everything perfectly meta, but I got the best stuff that I can afford and get in those slots for now. So that's my trait setup. Let's take a look at the crew stations. I'm going to talk about a couple of things in here really quickly. So you probably saw the ship I'm running is the Dalkina Command Strike Wing Warbird. Really like this ship. I think it is, out of all the ships in the game right now, it's probably the one that I like to fly the most. Out of the ships I have right now, it's definitely the one that I like to fly the most. Has both command and intelligence seating on it, and so pretty standard on my skills. But I'm going to talk about a couple of them that I run here that you might find funny. Because I don't have, I'm a Federation character. I don't have access to superior Romulan operatives of science profession and or engineering. So what I've done with my ship to maximize my damage potential is I have 4 tactical superior Romulan operatives that you purchase at your embassy. And the reason why that is if you look at their officer traits, you get increased crit and crit severity on these guys, and that is, I think it's 2.5% crit chance and 5% crit severity you get with each one. And don't quote me on that. I can't remember 100% for sure, but it is a substantial increase to your crit chance and to your damage when you actually do crit. So I like to run 4 of those guys because I'm running a beam overload build. Of course, one of the best skills that you can have with a beam overload build is this skill here, Override Subsystem Safeties 3, and it grants you up to 50% max power and all power levels. Now the problem with that skill is that when it ends, it knocks one random subsystem offline, and it could be your engines, it could be your weapons. And if either of those happens, you're kind of sitting duck there until everything comes back online. So what I do, a lot of people will run engineering team to mitigate that, but because I don't have enough engineering slots, ability slots, because I'm running 4 tactical officers, I don't have space for engineering teams. So what I actually do on my build is I run reroute power from life support. I don't always use it, but if I have a critical system knocked offline, my engines or my weapons, I will set this off because it will repair all my disabled subsystems. And it is a skill that is similar to override subsystem safeties because it increases all your power levels, just like override subsystem safeties. So in my opinion, it's a very, very valuable skill that a lot of people overlook a lot of the time because it slows down your bridge officer recharge speed. What I have found is that I have so much cooldown reduction built into my build because, as you can see on my engineer, I'm running aux to bat, auxiliary power to bat 1 and 2 in conjunction with the technician duty officers. We go to my actives. I have 3 technicians in here, and so each time that aux to bat skill is activated, I'm reducing all my bridge officer cooldowns by 30%. So I don't take a big hit to my cooldowns if I use reroute power from life support because of that bridge officer recharge speed tardiness that you get when you use that skill, but it's not really affecting me, and it's not only useful for increasing your power levels but also useful for restoring any disabled systems. So that's a little short explanation of some of the skills I have set up. Everything else in there is not really important. You can run just about whatever you want to. Intelligence team is useful. If you get yourself in a little bit of hot water, you can cool off your threat aggro for a short period with that skill, so it is useful. And then ionic turbulence, of course, it's a flight speed and turn debuffs, so it can kind of immobilize your enemies. So, but in any case, that's the long and the short of the crew stations that I'm running. Okay, so I'll show you what I'm running on the ship, and then I'll talk about things that I don't have yet that I think would make this build a lot better. So of course I'm running all Viridian Plasma weapons except for the kinetic cutting beam in the back. I'm using that to unlock the 2-piece bonus from the set, along with the simulated console that I have in my consoles. And of course that's granting me, when it triggers, it's granting me a 500% weapon power cost reduction, which is one of the things that makes this build work a lot more of the time right now. When it's not going off, I do notice it a lot more often that I'm getting kicked out of beam overload. The problem with that is that it's kind of like the Sex Panther. It works 80% of the time, every time, but it's not, you can't rely on it. I like to build my ship towards reliability where it's always going to work, not so that it's going to be really great in one run and a hack of crap in the next one. So I would like to get away from that eventually. I'll show you what I intend to hopefully replace that console with. I am running the Carbon Scorcher that comes with this ship because I think it is the coolest looking experimental weapon that I've seen so far. It looks like little mini ICBMs launching off your ship, and it still does pretty decent damage. It is not the meta weapon. That'd be the Soliton Wave Impeller. Another thing that I should mention, especially when you're playing on console, is of course we don't have the ability to adjust our power levels on our ships. We have 4 pre-baked settings that you can select from, and that's it. So a lot of times I think about that when I'm picking and choosing stuff for my ship. Can it increase a power level that I have no option to change otherwise than through a particular console or ability that I'm using? And really, that is one of the biggest letdowns about the console UI, is that we're losing fun and losing functionality of the game because they didn't give us the option to change that. And why not? Why not let there be 4 presets that players could use who don't want to mess with it, but anybody else should be able to go in and change each one of those presets, and they could select them and just still switch them like they do now, but it would be their own preset, not whatever cookie cutter one is given to them. But in any case, I digress on that point. Everything else on my ship gear is kind of the meta stuff. Tilly's shield for the 10% hull cap, 10% increased shield damage, and 120% hull regen. If I need the survivability, I can run the mycelial to get that 2-piece bonus, which gives me that 120% hull regen. But right now, even though this piece of junk warp core is in there, that's kind of what I need to make this work right now. So I'm losing that 120% hull regen by not having the mycelial warp core in there, so I'm getting some survivability in other places right now, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Of course, the deflector is the colony deflector for increased crit severity, shield pen, all that great stuff. It's the best meta deflector in the game. And then, of course, I'm using the competitive innervated engines that trigger off of me triggering my tactical abilities. Every time I trigger a tactical ability, it gives me like a free evasive maneuvers. So you'll see, you might find it funny, but I am running a torpedo high yield in one of my stations specifically just for triggering that skill. I just have it on my spam bar so that I can set it off when I need a free evasive maneuvers. And I have that extra slot because I'm running so many tactical SROs anyway. So yes, the innervated engines, I don't have the best pet here. I was waiting to get the Jirok to decide whether or not I wanted to blow the dilithium on getting the elite Alliance fighter squadrons. I haven't yet. I'm still kind of on the fence about it. I'm kind of leaning more towards getting a disruptor damage-based pet in the hopes that they'll apply the disruptor damage resistance debuff to my targets, and then I'll do more damage because, I'm not really relying on my pets to do a lot of damage, especially with an Ox to Bat build on a Strikewing Warbird like this. Your Ox level is always so drained that your ship can't always launch fighters after they get blown up anyhow, so it's not make it or break it for my ship. Yeah, I could use an upgrade on them. And then in your tactical consoles, of course, pretty much everybody is going to be using the vulnerability locators for the increased critical chance. Hey, if you got enough crit chance that you don't need anymore and you can go with the crit severity ones, do it and get the extra DPS. Unfortunately, because my account is only a year and a half old, my Endeavor rank is not high enough that I can get away from using those. So yes, I do have the vulnerability locators, and of course Lorca's console, it's a tactical console, so it has to eat up one of your tac console slots, but you can't it's the best tac console really you can get. So I mean, 4% crit chance and the weapon power, which is crucial to this build, and then the massive starship shield penetration really increases your damage potential. I have 2 Lobby consoles up here, and that's the tachyokinetic converter and the bioneural infusion circuits. Both of them are getting me extra crit severity, hull cap, which gives me extra crit chance on the circuits, and then on the tachyokinetic converter I'm getting that flight turn rate, which helps me get around a little bit, and crit chance and crit severity. Great consoles to have because Say for instance this plasma wave console, I can increase my plasma damage in these console slots, but I'm getting more damage increase from increasing my crit chance and crit severity than I am by just adding more and more plasma damage. So that is why I'm running those. And then of course that's the simulated console that I'm using to get that massive 500% weapon power cost reduction. And then it has crit chance, crit severity, weapon power, hull regen, all nice things to have on any build. Again, I will like to get away from that eventually. I'm also using the, well, I have slotted right now the Piezo focuser. Comes from the Lucari rep, gives you 40% plasma damage, turn rate, shield cap, doesn't hurt but not very useful. It is again another decent console, but I will say once again about Sex Panther, you know, I can't always run those consoles. And if I go into an elite TFO and there's players with less developed characters, I know I'm going to be the highest threat generator in there, and I'm going to get wiped out unless I give myself some survivability. So I have acquired and upgraded a few of these consoles. They come from the Discovery Rep. You can do the hourly or dailies from Discovery Rep, and you'll have a random chance to get them from a box. You can buy them from the Reputation store once you hit T5 too, but it's way cheaper just to get them out of the boxes. And especially for physical resistance, kinetic damage resistance, when you're fighting the Borg, your hull is weaker to kinetic, and your shields are stronger versus kinetic. And because your shields are almost always down in Borg TFOs, I really like to get some extra kinetic damage resist on my ship. Really increases my survivability. And of course, those versions have the increased critical hit chance, which doesn't help hurt my build at all either. So I may slot one or two of those depending. Now, what I would like to change about this build is, you know, I want to get rid of the Sex Panther. I want to get rid of the works good some of the times part. So I would like to replace this assimilated console, and I don't have it right now, but my eye is on Out of the Mud's market. When not now, of course, because the price is ridiculous. I think it's 8,000 Zen right now. But when this goes on sale, kind of like I got the Kobayashi Maru 75% off for 2,000. I intend to grab this next time it comes up for sale. And the reason is this is a console that gives you minus 25% to your weapon power cost, and it is, in my mind, what I'm thinking is if I get that console and enough other pieces with weapon power cost reduction in conjunction with the traits that I'm already running and whatnot, that I can get this build to a point where it's reliable, where it's not going to be dependent on whether the server can keep up. It's not going to be dependent on whether or not the assimilated console proc is going off. It's just going to be good all the time. And so that's kind of my goal. I'm going to get this console, and I'm going to work on a few other pieces and see how it goes with a setup like that. But I think that's the way to go forward, because if the server is out of touch for a few milliseconds with your game client, and in its mind you're draining this massive amount of power, you know, in some instances, I think that's what it's doing, is it's just not keeping up, and then it's not sure whether or not you have power to fire at that moment. But if it's calculating your power drain on a much reduced rate based on all that weapon drain, I think even if it's out of contact with the server for milliseconds, it may work better. And I could be completely off on this. It could be a different bug, a different issue. We know all the time new items, new ships come out with bugs, and it always takes a while to get them fixed, even though we went and spent a bunch of our Zen on it. So I don't know if things will change with these weapons, but from my experience with them, that's how they seem to be operating and or not operating properly currently. So that is the first item on my to get list. The next thing that I would like to add to this build is the Gamma Vanguard pack. And the reason for that is that this pack comes with two things that are really valuable to me. The one, the Gemmer class Intel flight deck carrier has the calm before the storm trait that comes with that ship, and that also has a massive increase to your firing cycle haste. So I would like to get that trait and test it out with my ship. It also seems like it could be works great some of the time kind of thing, but you know, I'm really gonna have to put it on the ship and see how much more of the weapon power gets drained and whether or not the build will be able to handle it. Now you may be wondering why I would get the Vanguard pack if it's just the one ship that I want. Well, there's the only place that I'm aware of that you can get the Jem'Hadar Vanguard bridge officers, you can get a science, an engineer, and a tactical officer out of here that are very similar to the SROs that will increase your damage potential. And so I want to get that pack so that I could put another engineer, instead of running those 4 superior Romulan operatives or SROs in these stations, I could get another engineer without losing the damage potential that these guys give me. But I could also get some more engineering skills and maybe put an engineering team like I was talking about, or something else more useful into some of those slots. Now, it is on my mind. I know there is a weapon power cost reduction DOF, duty officer, Krenim duty officer. Someone in chat mentioned it to me the other day, and I looked into it, and it is interesting to me. It gives you a minus 200 power, or minus 200% power cost reduction when you activate directed energy modulation. And I took a look at it, and I am thinking about it, and I may do some testing with it. But again, it only lasts for 8 seconds, and then you're going to be on cooldown until your directed energy modulation is up again. And so it's another thing that maybe if you added enough things like that in together, it should work most of the time. But there's still going to be that odd time where something doesn't go off, and things aren't going to go right for you. So I am trying to get away from that, but I did take a look at it. It is something kind of on my mind that I might test one of these days as well. The last thing I'll mention about my ship equipment is, of course, you notice I'm not running a torpedo, so I'm not currently getting the 2-part bonus from the Lorca's Console Discovery set. So most people will be running the Dark Matter Torpedo to unlock that set bonus, which gives you up to 25% extra crit severity, which is a huge and really nice bonus. I really should be running it on this ship because I probably can still keep the 30% proc, firing cycle proc up all the time, even with that torpedo up front. So if I wanted to do that, I certainly should for more damage potential. Right now I'm not, but just so you're aware, that is what most people doing leaderboard runs would be shooting for. The last thing I'm going to show you is just the duty officers that you might have seen I'm running there. Of course, the 3 technicians for the Oxtabat build, and I have a couple of the 47 Borg duty officers. Of course, these guys are really expensive. 24 and 27 gives you extra crit severity and critical chance. That is very expensive. DOF usually can, oftentimes is up for 750 million on the PlayStation. I'm running 2447 right now for the 15% chance when you activate tactical abilities to get power levels to max for 5 seconds, which is another thing that is kind of carrying this build right now with the massive power drains. It helps. There's other things I will test and see what I like in the future. I've got another duty officer. Which one is it? 22 of 47 that I'm going to pick up shortly here and throw in this build. I'm running a nurse right now just for the extra hull regen. One thing I'm curious about is whether or not on the PC, if you guys have the ground nurses that give you hull regen, because it almost seems like a bug, but maybe it's working as intended. But that is another thing that I'm going to add in this build. I just have a bunch of garbage duty officers in here right now, so I haven't even unlocked the final slot. But those ground nurses will be the most important thing that's going to go into my active ground roster, because each one of them, just like the nurse that I have in my space slot, each one gives you 20% regeneration. The problem is they're so bloody rare that they are flippin' expensive. I've been opening science DOF boxes for months and months, and I haven't seen one, and people try to buy them, and occasionally I'll see a white or a green or a blue one on the exchange. The last time I seen a green one, it was up there for 200 million, and the purples probably go for $1 billion plus. So one day I intend, if I eventually get some, I'm gonna fill this out. I don't even know if you guys get those on the PC, but yeah, that's what's gonna be going into my duty officer slots. There's other duty officers that I am still researching and may do testing with, and maybe one day I'll do a part 2 to this build if I find a lot of stuff that I like to add into it. And I will add to that if anybody has warp core recommendations for me so that I can get rid of my white warp core. I am going to go look at it tonight and see which one has some weapon power cost reduction on it and maybe swap it out. And or any other reliable weapon power cost reduction consoles or anything that anybody has any suggestions on, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if anybody has a Viridian Plasma cannon build, please take us a video and share us a link in the comments, or let us know in the comments how you like that. I'm curious about it as well. Might be really interested on interesting on a rapid fire build or something to that effect. So that's pretty much it for the ship equipment I'm running, guys. I'm gonna run a pickup group elite TFO we did, just a bunch of random people. I probably had a fair bit of survivability stuff slotted in there, but you can kind of get an idea as to what those weapons look like. They look pretty cool in that TFO we ran, but they look even cooler on smaller ships, because when you're firing at a Borg, they kind of spread out and go all over the place. But when you're firing a small ship and you have these beams rapid firing that almost look like cannons, I think that visually they're pretty stunning, pretty appealing. I actually really like the way they look. I miss that classic high-pitched charging sound you get from your standard kind of beam overloads. I do enjoy that, but it is a nice change of pace. All right, guys, I'll fire up, take a look. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it'll give you a little bit of information that might help you set up one of these builds. And if you have any suggestions for me, I'd love to hear about it. Anyways, guys, take care of yourselves. Thanks for coming and checking out the video. I'll catch you all in the next one.